And distinguished career. So she's been a partner at McKinsey's and she's set up her own business. And she's also written a book, which I'll hold up for you all now, which is How to Have a Good Day. So she's going to be talking to us about exactly that, how to have a good day. And really, it brings together insights from behavioural economics and psychology and comes up with some immensely practical tips that will really help us all have a good day. So I'd like to hand over to you now, Caroline, to kick us off.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here on this very slow news day where nothing is happening. I'm sure you're going to have plenty to talk about tonight over dinner. Let me give you just a few more things to chew over at the end of a long day, I'm sure. So I'm looking out across this room, and I know that you're all fabulously smart. There's a lot of intelligence in the room. And I know that everybody here is more than capable of making excellent decisions and doing insightful, thoughtful weighing up of multiple factors of importance and complexity. I know that we can all do that on our best days. But I have heard that you guys in the pension industry are facing a little bit of a challenge at the moment, some upheaval. I've heard something about regulatory uncertainty. Does that sound right? A little light market turbulence, some very exciting yield curve movements. It's probably not the time to say that the first decade of my professional career, I was actually a central banker. Okay, so you may now escort me from the stage. But the truth is that what we know from behavioral science, from neuroscience, from psychology and behavioral economics is that when we are facing this kind of uncertainty and this kind of upheaval, it tends to affect our ability to make good choices. And that's not about IQ, it's about the way that our minds and our brains work. And as a result, even I don't know how that got in there. Even perfectly smart people can do things that later they wish they hadn't. So I'm going to talk about 3 ways that stressful uncertainty can impair our decision-making and our thinking. But I'm going to also deliver some good news. I'm going to show how the research also points towards what we can do about it to help us be our smartest, brightest, best more of the time. I'm going to talk about defensive mode, selective attention, and cognitive load, which for the behavioral scientists in the audience will sound very familiar. And it will to you by the end of the talk. So, defensive mode. I'm going to tell you a story to illustrate how this works. A couple of years ago, I was giving a speech in Philadelphia, in the US, and it was a huge conference, even bigger than this one. There were thousands of people there. The peak attendance was something like 8,000. And I was speaking after lunch. Great. But that's okay. I was speaking after Michelle Obama. Not so great. So, I mean, whatever their politics, people were kind of a little starstruck by this. So this was quite a hard act to follow. She was great. And then there was me. And I like speaking. And I'd given this talk before. And my slides were all ready. And I was mic'd up. And I was ready. And I was ready to have a good time. And I got on stage. And I was having a good time. I will say that I was getting a little bit less energy back from the audience than I was expecting at certain points in what I was saying. But I put that down to the after-lunch slump and being after Michelle Obama. But then, about 20 minutes in, someone in the front row yelled up to me, waved at me, and said, "We can't really hear you." So first of all, I didn't believe it because I thought, you've been sitting there for 20 minutes? So thank you. I mean, that's fantastic. But I didn't believe it initially. But then I was sort of unclear what to do. But then I bent down to the lapel mic, and suddenly my voice boomed out across the room, as it should have been doing the whole time. And I realized that they were right. There was a sound problem. It was quite a big sound problem because I looked over at the AV guy and he just shrugged his shoulders And there were two other mics in the room, but they were fixed onto stands that were taped with a mile of duct tape on the floor. They weren't coming off. And so, I know 7% of communication is verbal, but this is a bit ridiculous. And it does occur to me that it does prove what some people have said to me, which is that in America, if you speak with a British accent, it doesn't matter what you say. But this is a bit of a disaster, obviously. And so I'm standing there, and honestly, I kind of freeze. My mind goes blank. And it feels like 1,000,000 years passes in that moment. So some years later, I finally work out that the thing that I can do is to unclip the one microphone that seems to be working in a sort of crappy manner, but still a little bit, and use it as the world's tiniest microphone for the world's weirdest Top of the Pops performance. And then just walk around the stage like this instead. Now, let me see whether I can get this back on. It would be funny if I did it again, right? So you might be thinking, well, okay, but that's blindingly obvious. Obviously, you have this microphone. It works kind of if you put your mouth right next to it. Obviously, that's the thing you should do. But remember that moment of silence and moments of total freezing that I had when I was on stage. And what was happening then was something that I understood very well, which is what happens to us when we're faced with any kind of a threat. And to explain this, let me explain that at any given time, including right now, your brain is scanning the environment around yourself for potential rewards to seek out and discover and enjoy, and potential threats to defend you against. And by threats and rewards, we don't necessarily mean what happens in the budget, although that is definitely in the realm of what can be rewarding or threatening. I'm talking about something a little bit more existential than that. I'm talking about the fact that we are deeply wired to care a lot about our sense of self-worth, by which I mean whether we feel competent, whether we feel in control, and we feel we've got autonomy and space to act, whether we feel there's a point to what we're doing. Competence, autonomy, purpose really matters. Social standing. You only have to think about that last time that someone you let pull out in front of you didn't thank you in traffic, right? We respond to fairness. We care about being included. We care about being respected. Obviously, sort of, but the thing is that these rewards are very profound for us, and we need them in order to think clearly from day to day. And whenever any of those things is undermined, the brain perceives that as a threat. So anytime that you feel a little out of your depth, you feel a little challenged in terms of your sense of competence and sense of control, anytime that it feels like you're not being treated fairly, it can be enough to be coded as a threat by your brain. So certainly, has to be clear, standing on stage and feeling like a complete idiot in front of 1,000 people would definitely tick the box for being perceived by my poor brain as a bit of a threat. Now, a couple of things you want to know about this. First of all, when your brain is more focused on threats than in rewards in the situation, it triggers a kind of defensive response, which you probably know of, fight or flight, you've heard that. It's not in the workplace generally punching someone or running from the room, although we've all been in situations where we might have liked to do that. Fight or flight in the workplace typically looks much more like the kind of bad behavior that you might experience quite a bit. It might be a rude comment, or it might be someone ignoring your email for 3 months. So this defensive response is very instinctive, it's very fast, and it's a version of what's kept us safe for a very long time. But here's what you want to know. Because it doesn't take much to trigger it, we've just established that. And when your brain perceives a threat and decides that it's launching a defensive response, it actually takes quite a lot of mental energy to launch a defensive response, and your brain has a limited capacity of mental energy. And so by launching the fight or flight response, it has to take the energy from somewhere, and what it does is it depresses activity in the part of our brain called the prefrontal cortex. And you can see this in a brain scanner. You can put people in some very unpleasant situation, actually mildly unpleasant situation, by showing them some unhappy images. What happens? Activity goes down in their prefrontal cortex. And some of you will know that the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that's responsible for our most sophisticated, wonderfully witty thinking. It's the part of the brain that's responsible for reasoning, for self-control, for planning. It's what you need so much of in your daily work. And what we know is that you lose those prefrontal cognitive abilities when you feel even mild, uncontrollable stress. So to be clear, what that means is, just as you are struggling with a challenge, you're faced with something where you really need to rise to that challenge, you become dumber, which is a shame. Which is a shame. Now, luckily, you're intelligent, but it's still going to shave off a degree of creativity and insight and wisdom that you're going to be able to bring to anything that is in front of you. So it is very hard to be brilliant in defensive mode, and that is why my mind went blank on stage. But I knew about something else, which sounds bad first of all, but it's going to be good in a second. It turns out that uncertainty tends to amplify any of those threats that the brain responds to. So any kind of negative situation you're going into, if the situation is uncertain, your brain will respond more negatively. And this study that I have in mind was one that was done in the UK, actually, and a bunch of people signed up for the experiment, and they were asked to touch a number of very hot plates, which were uncomfortably hot to touch. Never sign up for a psychology experiment, by the way. Uncomfortably hot to touch, actually painful. And what they did was they gave some people, for some of the plates, good information about what to expect. And then for other people, they gave them poor information, like messy information, lots of noise in the data, very hard to know what they were going to get. And what they discovered was that people who had a sense of what was coming were better able to handle the pain. The people who had no idea what to expect reacted much more strongly. And you see this very, very, very visibly on a brain scan. So this is what's going on for us. Our sense of threat and our readiness to go into defensive mode is much enhanced by uncertainty, which is a shame, in times like this. But here's the thing. If we can amplify our certainties in the heat of the moment, if we can ask ourselves questions that ground what's going on as much as possible, even though there's a lot that you can't ground, then you can nudge yourself out of defensive mode and bring more of your more sophisticated neural capacity back online. And that was what I was busy doing once I had frozen. I was asking myself, okay, what do I know? What do I control? What can I do? What are these certainties? What do I know for sure? Okay, I know that I'm on stage, come what may, for another 40 minutes. I know that for sure in Philadelphia. I know that the most important thing here is actually to try and make good use of that so that people feel like they're walking away with something. Okay. Might not sound like a lot, but it's a hell of a grounding thing to do. What can I shape or control? Well, not a lot, but I can certainly control my attitude to this. I can actually have a bit of a sense of humour about it. Our spirits are supposed to be good at laughing at ourselves. So I thought, okay, I can choose to make a joke about the fact I've written a book called How to Have a Good Day, and I'm clearly not having a good day. I can also use the story in the course of the speech when I'm talking about resilience and how to deal with situations that are challenging. I can do that kind of almost immediately. And then what is a no regrets first step? What can I do immediately? I can take a breath. I can summarize. I can apologize. And I can carry on. And that was what gave me the clarity to realize, okay, I need to just use this as a handheld microphone. Now, there are many situations where this has been used in much bigger trauma situations than me being on stage and feeling a bit embarrassed. It's used in PTSD counseling. It's used for people who are facing really, truly awful challenges. And of course, there are many other questions. But these are quite good because you can remember them when you're right in the middle of something awful happening and you feel that sense of stress. So I'd like you to just take a moment now And dare I say it, I'm going to ask you to talk to the person next to you for 30 seconds. And if you are on your own for social distancing purposes, then you just need to yell a little louder or maybe turn around. Tell them what situation is most stressing you right now and what you could use from this. 30 seconds, quick reflection.
Very good.
I'm not going to spend too much time on the last one, just in case you're worried about time. I'm going to... That's All right, let me rudely interrupt your incomplete conversation with your new best friend. I apologize for interrupting. The reason that I am giving you a moment to process is actually not just because it's nice to hear everybody's voices, although it is. We know that when you have even a moment to reflect on what you've just heard, you're way more likely to remember it, and you're way more likely to draw insight from it and join it to your own experience. There was a study done with a call center in India which had new employees coming in, and they had a 3-week training program, and it was for real. It wasn't in a laboratory. And these new staff members were asked to take a test at the end of the 3 weeks. In the 3-week training, some of the people were given a bit less teaching, and they were asked at the end of the day to instead spend 15 minutes reflecting on what they'd learned. Now, at the end of the 3 weeks, they've had, a fair amount less teaching at that point. But what happened was that the people who had had less teaching time but more reflection time scored 23% higher on their test. So that's why it's worth just taking a moment to step back, and that's why I'm doing that, even if it's just a few moments. Okay, selective attention. So you've got your sophisticated brain a little bit back online as a result of grounding yourself in your certainties. Are you done? No, you're not done, because even your sophisticated brain, even the conscious part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, has limitations. It has challenges, and I'm going to actually get you to demonstrate it this time. Now that you are such good friends with the people around you, I would like you to look around. You don't actually have to talk to them for this one. I'd like you to look at the 10 people nearest you and count how many of them are wearing glasses. And you're very numerate, you can do this very quickly. I'm going to give you just 5 seconds to do that. And when you've got it, give me a self-satisfied nod. Yeah, okay, that's great. Good, all right. Excellent. On my mark, can you shout out the number? Go. 7. Great. All right. Fantastic. I could have asked you a harder question. How many people do you think are wearing contact lenses? No, that would have been harder. But I am going to ask you another question. Do not turn your head. And at this point, of course, you really want to turn your head. Do not turn your head. Keep your eyes on me. Now, how many of those 10 people had dark hair? Shout out the number now. 3. Okay. Now, a bit quieter the second time around. Is your level of confidence higher for the first question or the second question? First. Okay. The people who said second, I'm going to talk to you later because we're going to put you through a brain scanner. It's very exciting. Okay, it's a little bit of a hokey example. What I'm trying to demonstrate is something which is sort of on one level sort of obvious, which is that we see what we're looking for. It was a kind of unfair question to ask you about people's hair color when that was not what I'd asked you. I'd asked you about glasses. But on the other hand, you did actually look at people's heads. So why is it that we were actually unable to be as confident with the hair color? And the reason is that the deliberate conscious part of our brains, which again is fabulously intelligent, has an ability to process information that is remarkable, but it is not infinite. And at any given time, we are surrounded by trillions of pieces of data. When you look at, well, since we're with hair, let's stick with hair. When you look at the hairs on the head of the person next to you, each of those pieces of hair is a piece of data, and the way that the lovely light in this room is falling on those hairs is another piece of data. Each carpet fibre in this gorgeous carpet is a piece of data. We are surrounded by too much information to process consciously. So, and just to give you a sense of the scale of the imbalance, our conscious mind is thought to maybe process 50 bits of information at any given time, not trillions. So we have to have some kind of solution to this, otherwise we would just freeze like an overloaded computer. So what happens is, automatically, subconsciously, below our level of consciousness, our brain is filtering out what seems irrelevant so that we can direct our tiny amount of conscious attention to what matters most. So it's a little bit like we are looking at the world through a pair of binoculars, where we see what is in focus and we don't see the rest, or hear, or feel. This applies to all of the senses. This is selective attention. Our brain is constantly selecting what is relevant enough for us to see and hear and feel and so forth. But it does mean that far from being objective observers of humanity and the financial markets, we are actually experiencing a incomplete version of reality at any given time. Incomplete and subjective. Incomplete. We're missing things all the time. And there's a really simplistic rule that the brain uses about what is important enough for us to notice consciously. It is basically this, and you can fit any number of heuristics and biases underneath this. It is that our brain directs that tiny amount of conscious attention towards whatever matches what's already top of mind for us. What's already top of mind for us. Some of you will know why there's a gorilla here. For those who know that, I'm going to give you a different study. So there was a group of radiologists. You know what radiologists do if you've ever had an X-ray or an MRI or whatever. They were doing a pretty serious job, and it was a real situation at Harvard Medical School. They were looking through a stack of lung scans, and they were looking for early signs of lung cancer. They were looking for nodules. And in the last of the lung scans was printed a picture of a plastic gorilla, in homage to the original gorilla study, which was a picture of a plastic gorilla. Now, given what I've just said, how many of the radiologists saw the gorilla? And if you read my book, then don't say anything. How many of the radiologists saw the gorilla? None. It kind of rounds to none, actually. It's 83% of them did not see the gorilla. Despite the fact that eye tracking devices showed that most of them did look at it, and the fact that the gorilla was more than 40 times the size of the average lung nodule. And they're trained to spot abnormalities. So our brain can really filter out things that are right in front of us. And why, just to bring it out even more clearly, why did they not see it? Because they weren't looking for it. So if we're not looking for something in a pile of data, yes, it is absolutely possible that we could miss red flags if we're not looking for them. Absolutely it is. And the effect is more subtle even than just missing numbers or misreading numbers or missing objects completely. There's another study which illustrates why you should never have a psychologist as a friend. I'm going to imagine that this room is split in two. And I imagine that you've signed up for a psychology experiment where the first step is that I give you all a little test. And then I put half of you, this half of the room, in a bad mood, little bit of a bad mood, by telling you that you've failed this very easy test. No big deal, but it would annoy you a bit, right? You guys, you're fine. Well done. And then I, the person running the experiment, gives everybody a neutral description of an individual to read, carefully written to be neutral. And what happens is then I ask you to tell me how likable this person is. You guys think this person is perfectly likable. You guys, because you're in a bad mood, think this person is less likable. That's how subtle the top-of-mind effect can be. It can even come from our mood, from our attitude. So yes, if you had a bad commute and you spilled coffee on yourself, or even worse, someone else spilled coffee on you this morning, is it going to affect how you review a proposal in front of you? Yes, a little bit. I mean, maybe not a lot, but is it going to be there? Science suggests yes, there'll be an effect. And we also know that whatever assumptions, and many of you will know what confirmation bias is. What's interesting about confirmation bias is that it's not just that we look for evidence that confirms our assumptions, it's also that we can twist reality to fit our assumptions. This is a picture of a banana. I think we can all agree. There's no trick question there, I promise. In another study, researchers asked people to adjust the background to match the lightest color on the banana. And so they were painstakingly adjusting the background. And remember that this is black and white. And it is entirely grayscale, totally black and white. What happened was that people made the background very slightly yellow. Why? Because their brains expected the banana to be yellow, and so they saw it as such. So can we twist information? Yes, we can. Yes, we can. And it's not just what's inside our head, because I've talked about our aim, our attitude, and our assumptions. Anything we're exposed to, any information that we're exposed to, however irrelevant, is going to shape what we perceive and are drawn to as an answer. There are lots of studies on this. There's one that was done with a roulette wheel, and it was fixed to stop either on 10 or 65. So the person comes in for the experiment, twists the roulette wheel, lands on 10 or on 65, and then they're asked a question, which is, how many African nations are there in the UN? The people who land on 10 say 25. I mean, most people are going to have to guess that, right? The people who land on 65 with a higher anchor have their estimate, on average, dragged up, and they say 45. The answer is 54, as it happens. So even when the information isn't at all relevant, we are affected by it. We are shaped by it. Our perception is driven by this. So what does this tell us? It tells us that we need to be really conscious of our filters, our cognitive filters, as we're going into anything that matters. I am not saying that you necessarily want to use this in every conversation you have with your spouse, although, by the way, it is actually quite good to remember the humility of knowing that you may miss things. There are gorillas they may have seen that you may not have. Anyway, when you're thinking about your work and you're thinking about a task that really requires your objectivity, to be very conscious of what you're taking in, knowing it is going to affect even you, even smart, intelligent, sensible you, is going to be affected by what you're bringing in. Imagine a colleague who you don't agree with. So imagine someone that you don't see eye to eye with. Maybe they've got a different risk tolerance to you. Maybe they're more risk-loving or risk-averse than you are. Get that person in your mind, or anyone else that you disagree with in any way. Now, imagine you're going into a conversation with them. If you are not consciously going to say to yourself, what is top of mind for me as an aim, you're going to carry in subconsciously perhaps something which is not super helpful. You might go in thinking, I'm going to prove them right, I'm going to prove them wrong, I'm going to prove myself right, rather, and prove them wrong. And the thing is that, although that might seem sort of childish when you say it out loud, often subconsciously we do carry this sort of stuff with us. And if that is the aim that is in your mind, it will shape what you perceive. You will see everything that confirms that you're right and they're wrong. So you might take a moment to say the obvious, which is, what is the real aim here? Okay, the real aim here is to do the right thing for the client. Okay, obvious and yet helpful to have top of mind, because it might make you more able to see all the risks and all the opportunities. Check in with your attitude, your assumptions, your anchors, what you're taking in. If you notice that you think that this guy is going to be a pain in the arse because they've been a pain in the arse in the past, that is not an unreasonable expectation, right? We look at past data in order to extrapolate from that. So if the person has been annoying, they may well be annoying. But what's the gorilla you might miss? There might be something that they say that's really useful and intelligent, a bit left field. It might be something that gives you a sense that there might be a scope for compromise, a space for intelligent compromise and coordination that perhaps you hadn't seen before. And I am not saying, by the way, that it is going to be there, because we're not in the world of make-believe. But I am saying that if you then decide what you really want to look out for, maybe it is to sort of find something interesting in what this person says. You don't have to be an angel about it. What is something interesting this person says? Or where is there scope for some kind of compromise? Then you are way less likely to miss that gorilla if it does present itself. So I'd like you to, again, talk to your favorite person and talk about something where this really matters, where there's something that's going on for you that really matters, where you might want to be conscious of the cognitive filters that you're taking in. And maybe choose one of these questions that you most like. 30 seconds of reflection. Of course, if they're the person that's really annoying you, you don't have to talk to them. But wouldn't it be great if you did? All right. I'm going to break up your deep conversations. Take a moment. Okay. So reset your filter. Be very conscious of what your filters are. I do want to add one other thing about cognitive load, because this is probably how a lot of you feel right now. Not just because it's been a long day, but also it's been a long year and a long decade. So there's a lot that we carry with us from day to day. And actually, if we're trying to be really adept in being very conscious of resetting our filters so that we broaden our field of vision when it really matters, if we're trying to notice when we're stressed, call ourselves on it, and ground ourselves in our certainties, it does take a little bit of mental agility, and it requires us to be kind of awake and conscious and coping. And there is something I want to add to the whole toolbox here that might be worth just pointing out to you. And I'm going to get you to demonstrate it again. I'm going to ask you to count to 7 as fast as you can, out loud on my mark, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Do you think you can do it? I know it's been a long day. All right. You ready? Go. Excellent. As you would expect from a very numerate audience. Okay. Now let's really mix things up. I don't know how this is going to go, because it's not numbers, it's letters. I'm going to ask you to do the same with letters. I'm going to ask you to say A, B, C, D, F, G as fast as you can, maybe with a bit of energy, just a little bit. Are you ready? Go. There you go. Fantastic. Now I'm going to ask you to do something that should only be twice as hard and take twice as long, which is to interleave the two, which is the A1, B2, C3, and so on. Okay? As fast as you can. Are you ready? Go. Well done. You did it. Or you didn't, but you did. You know, what you did do was you illustrated beautifully a metaphor for 30 years of research into multitasking. Yeah, it turns out that scattering our conscious attention, remember that tiny amount of conscious attention that we have, scattering that conscious attention across more than one task at once makes us, well, let me ask you, were you faster when you did it separately or mixed up? Did you make more mistakes when you did it separately or mixed up? Right, okay, exactly that. So typically research finds, I mean, there are any number of studies, like maybe 30% slower if you're trying to do 2 things at once. You tend to make between 2 and 4 times as many mistakes when you are trying to multitask. And you are measurably less wise. There was a study that was done with a group of people, again in a fairly realistic work context. They had to make a decision about where to locate a warehouse. And there was an objectively best answer, but it was complicated. They were trying to work it out. They were being interrupted by emails coming in, delivering new information, some of it relevant, some of it not. People were stopping by and saying hi, dropping by, maybe also giving them more information, just like a kind of everyday at the office kind of situation. Maybe not right now with coronavirus where we're all working from home, but in the office scenario, quite similar. And even if you're working from home, you're interrupted all the time with emails and instant messages and so forth coming through. So we are constantly juggling. And what the research found was that people who were interrupted more objectively missed the best answer more often. So yes, we are smarter when we single task, when we do what our grandmothers told us to do, which is really try and bring our attention to one thing at a time as much as possible. And some of you might be saying, yeah, but I can listen to music. That's fine. It doesn't impinge on my ability to think. Now, the reason for that is that automatic tasks, things that don't require conscious attention, you can do in parallel. But anything that requires conscious attention, you actually end up in a situation where your brain is having to switch frantically from one thing to another. And that has a cost. It has a cost in terms of your mental acuity and in terms of your speed. So if you do nothing else with this set of information, be more deliberate about going offline or getting undistracted for the thing that matters most for you in any given day. I'm not saying you can do it for the whole day, but if there's something you really need to think through, there is such a payoff to working out how to put your phone on airplane mode more quickly, to getting rid of all of the notifications on every device that might be near you, doing everything you can. And I have to say, anything you can do to make it easier to do the right thing is going to help. And this is something I work on all the time myself. This is something called a resistor case. I bought a kit from a guy in Canada to make this. You're more attached. Have any of you heard of the IKEA effect? You're more attached to things that you make yourself. So I made it myself. This is me making it myself in my New York apartment. And the way it works is that it's incredibly strong Velcro. So if you put your phone inside with an intention to try and do some work, you really have time to think about the choices that you're making with your life. So there we are. Ta-da! So, all of which to say, it's worth thinking about. There's one last thing I want to leave you with, which is, you know this? Have you seen this? This is terrible. This is terrible in many different ways, actually. It's terrible when you look at the vertical axis, actually, the fact that it's not higher. But it turns out that going offline, getting undistracted is going to be really great for bringing your IQ back online, as much as it possibly can, to allow yourself to bring your best thinking to your most difficult topics. But the truth is sometimes you just need to take a step back. You actually need to stop, take a step back, and take a break in order to recharge, because your conscious brain, let's go back now, gets freaked out quite easily, goes into defensive mode quite easily, suffers from selective attention, so can't perceive everything, and filters out a lot of stuff, can only do one thing at a time, and yes, it gets tired quite easily. And so the longer it is since we've taken a break, this is a very relevant study right now, but there are other studies that show the longer it is since we've taken a break, the less good our choices are. As you know, if you've ever been on a 3-hour shopping trip in a department store. So, with that in mind, breaks are not downtime, breaks are not soft. The more that you can give yourself occasional short breaks, even if it's just 2 minutes, the sharper your thinking is going to be. So to be your wisest self, to sum up, notice your stress, amplify your certainties in that heat of the moment, and you will think more clearly. Be deliberate about setting your filters. Know what you're taking in. Check in with yourself before you're going into a meeting that matters or a piece of analysis that really matters. And decide what you want to have top of mind, what you want to be directing your attention towards. And do plan periods when you go offline. And the really good thing about the last thing is that in half an hour, after you've had a break, you're going to be so much more intelligent than you are right now. And that's something to raise a glass to, I'm sure. Thank you. I must not forget this.
No, you mustn't. Thank you so much for that, Caroline. That's a brilliant talk. And what I really love about the book is it's got loads of really practical tips in it, so things that we can do right now. So it's all about taking those breaks, as you were just saying, don't have 3-hour meetings. Why did we ever think that was a good idea? But I know I have some, so
and we make decisions at the end of the meeting.
We do, that's right. Yeah, when we've all got cognitive overload. I loved also in the book you talk about using humour, and that gives people just a small reward for their attention. I think that's brilliant, and also to set your intention.
We should ask them whether that worked or not.
Well, exactly. We should. Yeah. So there was a bit of humour in that talk. Better for it? Yep. Thought so. And set your intention for your day, as that's what your brain's going to focus on. So I just think it's really worth a read, and there's some valuable things that I think we can all take into our day-to-day lives.
That's really nice of you. Thank you.
Well, that's fine. You gave me the book. I'm going to promote it because I've read it. But I've got a question that's come in, and I think this is probably one that we'll all feel. So it's talking about it. Time pressures can really load up that cognitive pressure that you were talking about. So have you got any tips around that particular issue?
Well, McKinsey, the consulting firm, is famously, has quite long hours and is quite a hard place to work. I really worked hard on applying what I was talking about there with single tasking, with taking breaks. I also worked on batching my tasks together to try to collect together things that felt a little bit separate. And that meant, in practice, actually having maybe 3 email blitzes, so morning, lunchtime, and evening. And I got through my email more quickly by not incurring more of the switching costs between different types of tasks. And I ended up, and I don't know whether I should say this on the record, but hey, I left 8 years ago. So I worked 2 hours a day less than everybody else around me. And I actually spent the first few years there thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be found out. And then, 12 years passed and they still hadn't found out. So it can really add up. And I would say just start small, be kind to yourself, don't beat yourself up. Don't try and go offline, for example, for half an hour the first time you do it, because you'll hate yourself. You'll be annoyed with yourself for kind of wanting to reopen everything. Start small and build up, and pat yourself on the back for anything you can do.
That's great. I'm really going to try this with my daughter as well. I love the idea of putting the phone in the sealed container, but she has to make it herself, obviously, to make it work.
Well, that's right.
But she's practically surgically attached to it at the moment, so that would be a really good thing to learn. Yeah. And then just one other question that came in. The world of investment management. So, we're talking about mind over markets. How do investment managers overcome some of these biases?
Yeah.
How do they not see the gorilla? Or see the gorilla?
So I think there was a practice that we had. I used to be one of the people who wrote the inflation report, and the Bank of England inflation report. I'm guessing you would be an audience that would know that. Usually, when I say inflation report, people think I would type out 2.5% and send it out to the markets. So no, I used to write the inflation report, and there were 4 of us who did it, and we were in a really tight little team, really mutually supportive. And there is sometimes no substitute for actually having a team process that says, what are we missing? And there was one thing that we did, which was we had everybody have their models recalculated, not even recalculated, rebuilt from the ground up by another person on the team. And there was one time I did find an error in one of my colleagues' spreadsheets, because the brightest and best of us can make mistakes like that. There's a CEO that I coach who is one of the smartest people I know, and this is one of the biggest journeys he's gone on in the last few years, because he can almost always get to an answer more quickly than most people around him. And that is very tempting. And then to understand these blind spots, and to have now developed a technique of saying, he actually boiled down all of those questions that I had about aim, attitude, and so on. He says, what am I missing? And he can be quite forceful about it. But in a team meeting, people know he's going to say it, and he's built an understanding that it is okay. In fact, it is ideal if you own the fact you're not going to see everything. And to actually say, what am I missing? What are we missing? And to go around the room and hear from everybody, you've got a much better chance collectively of handling those blind spots. So that's what I would probably encourage you to do if you can.
Oh, that's brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Caroline. Well, that actually ends the sessions for today. So thank you so much for attending the opening session. So we are going to start off tomorrow morning at 9:30 for a keynote session from the Pensions Minister. So I'm certainly looking forward to seeing you all back here then. But in the meantime, if you could rate the session on the app and join me in thanking Caroline one more time.